What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we are gonna take the 5150 Iconic and put it to the ultimate test, a live band setting. Let's do it! Alright guys, hope you're doing great out there today. If this is your first time here at my channel, my name's Kyle. What I do is I take awesome high gain amps, overdrives, guitars, speakers, pedals, cabinets, pickups. I record them with a simple SM57 setup and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. So if that's something that you think you're into, be sure to hit that like button on the way out and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything else. Thanks! Alright guys, so tonight is a night that I've been waiting for a while. Ever since I got back from tour in December, I have not been able to play with a band because as soon as I got back, it was the holidays, and then as soon as the holidays came around, I got the vid. So, I have been out of commission for a couple of weeks, and in that time, I've gotten the 5150 Iconic in here, and I have basically done everything I could think of to put it through its paces in just a single player setting and really feel the amp out, see what it's capable of, see what cabinets and speakers that it matches up with, see what overdrive, see what pickups really, complement the amp and what I could do to just make it sound optimal for my personal use, because tone is a very personal thing. So even if you like the amp in its stock form, most of us are still gonna do little things here and there to tweak it to our liking. So anyways, tonight I finally have band practice with my band Human Animal. So I figured, what better test than to take it to band practice and put it up against my other guitarists, Rev E dual rectifier and 5150 stereo setup that he uses for the band, and see how well the 5150 Iconic holds up against, a loud drummer in a smaller room with a massive sounding rig on the other side. My bassist plays through a Mesa 400 plus tube amp through an SVT 810, and we have a full PA system. So I mean, it's just, there's a lot to compete against. And I know that if I can get the 5150 Iconic sounding good in this situation, then I'm gonna be able to get it sounding good pretty much anywhere. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna pack up the amp, I'm gonna take it to practice tonight. On the pedal board that I'm bringing with me, I have one of my favorite boosts, the MXR M77 Custom Badass Modified Overdrive. You guys have heard me talk about this overdrive plenty of times. The reason that I chose this one over something like the Deadweld, which is typically my go-to, is the mids are a little rounder and a little bit more broad on the M77, and there's also a bump button which kind of pushes the lower mids forward as well. It doesn't take out as much of that low mid punch as say something like a Tube Screamer or an SD1 or even the Duality would. It also doesn't accentuate those upper mid frequencies quite as much, which I have found on the Iconic, when you try to really turn the mid up on that amp, it seems to really only affect the higher mid frequencies, which can kind of contribute to some of the harshness that people hear. So in my opinion, or in my experience, using a pickup and overdrive complement that doesn't, accentuate those upper mids tends to balance the amp out a little bit more, just makes it sound a little bit more full. The amp has tons of low end, so we don't need to worry about low end, and the top end obviously is very present, but you can easily dial that back and make the amp sound nice and smooth. So it's really in the mid-range where it needs a little work for my personal taste. So for that reason, I also threw an MXR 10-band EQ on the pedal for the loop of the amp. Now I'm going to go ahead and record us playing a song two different ways. I'm going to bring an Audio-Technica AT2020 and just use it as a general room mic, as those are pretty good at picking up everything that's coming at it. And I will record one take of the song with the EQ turned off, and then I will record one take of the song with the EQ turned on, where I kind of enhance the mid frequencies a little bit, because I have found if you bump a couple frequencies on that EQ pedal, that you can kind of almost bring out that classic 5150 cocked wah mid sound pretty easily from the amp. So it's a nice addition to throw that EQ in the loop if you feel that the amp suffers from not having enough mids. So I'm gonna give both of those a try. I'm gonna record the results and give you guys clips here and there of the songs that we played. And then I'm gonna come back and let you know my thoughts on what I heard. So without further ado, here's a couple clips of the amp in action. All right, guys, I am back from band practice. It is now the next morning, and I'm gonna give you guys some thoughts on what I heard, both in the room and on the playback audio. So in the room, as you guys can see, I was playing through a Marshall 1960 vintage cab. This is the vintage cab with the vintage 30 speakers in it. I have never been a huge fan of that cab, especially versus the Mesa cab that my other guitarist uses, because it's got the 16 ohm V30s in it, and Marshall cabs just tend to not be my favorite anyways. But overall, that cab has sounded quite fizzy in the past compared to a lot of the other V30 cabs that I normally use, like my Mesa cab or one of my old Ampeg cabs or something like that. I don't know what it is. It could be the era of vintage 30s. The cab also really has like no low end response at all either, so I was pushing the low end quite a bit on the EVH Iconic to try to get it to keep up, and I was kind of fighting the fizziness of the cab as well, because that cab, I took my SLO to practice and used that cab one time before, and the SLO just sounded like Fizz City. Same with my 5150, so I basically have to kind of carefully figure out what amp to bring to practice now, because that is the cab that is there for me to use. There's no room for me to bring another cab, unfortunately, so I'm kind of stuck on that thing. So just keep a lot of that stuff in mind when I tell you what I'm about to tell you. So first impressions, I set the amp up. I didn't turn the EQ on at all. I kind of dialed everything in against his rectifier, and I started on the green channel, and on the green channel, I felt like it sounded good, but it was like just not enough mid content there for me. Overall, it sounded a little bit bigger and fuller, which this band, I don't go for the super tight thrash thing. This band is more of like a early 90s New York hardcore, you know, punk inspired hardcore band. So it's definitely much more loose in the wrist and the way that we play. It's not a lot of fast, tight percussive chugs like I would normally play in Bushido code. So I do set my amp and my tone up a little bit differently than I would normally through my demos here. But even so, I just found the green channel just didn't suit my ear as well. When I switched over to the red channel, I felt like I was getting some more round mids out of that, and also just the gain structure seemed a little bit nicer to my ears. It was a little bit more fluid. So once I had everything set up, I took a little video, a little shot of my settings, which I'll throw up on the screen now. And as you can see, I had the mids and the lows pushed fairly high, and then I had the highs somewhere around a little past noon, and I had the presence dialed back to about 4. I had the resonance up around 7. So I felt like with all these settings, the amp sounded really good. It actually sat in the mix quite nicely with the dual rectifier and 5150 that I was competing against. And also keep in mind, Adam is gonna have way more headroom because he's running 2 100-watt amps through one cab, whereas I'm running one 80-watt amp through one cab. So overall, he did have a little bit more fullness, he had more low end, and because of the 2 amps that he was using, he had more mids. But even keeping that in mind, the Iconic did not hit its maximum headroom by any means. The amp did not start to fart out or fall apart or anything like that, so that 80 watts definitely holds up to a band scenario, no problem. I know that's one thing that a lot of people were worried about. They were worried about, it's 80 watts, it's made in China, they probably use cheaper transformers. Will this thing have enough headroom to compete with other 100-watt amps? And I can say easily, yes, I had no issues achieving a nice, clean, high volume tone without the amp falling apart in the process. One thing that I did fight with a little bit, and I think a lot of it is due to the combination of the cab and the amp, because the amp does have a little upper mid abrasiveness to it, and so does the cab. The cab naturally has fizz, like I said, on its own, so I was kind of touching the controls here and there to just, you know, work that out as much as I could. And in the end, I definitely got a tone where I felt like it sounded just fine with no external EQ in the loop. As you guys can hear from the sound samples, I feel like it blended in really nicely with the dual rec and the 5150. Now, overall, I am the rhythm guitarist in that band. He is the lead guitarist. My tone, I would say, kind of fit right in with his tone, just as like an accentuation of what was going on. It wasn't like 2 separate guitar tones that were cutting through. Mine was kind of blending in with his, but I was worried that the Iconic might get buried because the mids are more relaxed, and that just didn't happen. It definitely did not disappear in the mix. It sat pretty much right where you would want it to. Now, me personally, I like my guitar to cut through the mix. I don't like it to just sit in behind everything else, and the only time that you really notice that it's there is when I'm playing by myself, or when I stop playing, you notice that there's some fullness missing from the tone of the band. So for that reason, I went ahead and I kicked on the EQ for another go through, And what I found was just by bumping a couple frequencies just a little bit on that MXR 10-band EQ, that amp immediately sat right out in front. Like no problem. It fixed some of the mid frequencies that I thought it was missing in the low and the middle of the mid-range section. And really, in that sense, both guitars had their own voice, and when one cut out, you knew who was playing. The tones were both distinct. They both sat, you know, kind of a little bit out front of the mix, but not in a bad way, because as you'll see, the drums were still cutting through plenty. With the EQ and the loop, I found myself liking the tone of the amp a little bit more, but on the playback, I almost felt like the amp was a little bit too out front. Like I almost felt like I was overpowering Adam in the mid department. So fine tuning those EQ frequencies to give just a little bit less of a mid push, and I think that it would sit nicely. I also think that I probably wouldn't even need that EQ if I brought something like my Mesa cab. The Mesa 412s tend to be rounder. They tend to be a little shaved off in the highs due to being 8 ohm and having that jute dipped grill cloth where it rolls off some of those high frequencies. And also we all know that Mesa cabs have, you know, plenty of low end to go around. So I really feel like a different cab would have really kind of negated the need for me to even use that EQ, because I think without it, it was already sitting nicely in the mix. And I think with a cab that has a little bit more of a mid push and a little bit less top end fizz, like you're gonna find in an 8 ohm Mesa cab versus a 16 ohm Marshall cab, it's gonna fill in those frequencies that I felt were missing on its own, no EQ needed. So, and even once I threw that EQ in the loop, like I said, it fixed some of the complaints that I had about the amp. And all I did was boost a couple frequencies. I didn't cut anything. I didn't make any major adjustments, and that's all it took to really get it kind of in that same realm as an original 5150 or a 5152. So I think the amp is very usable. I think if you're willing to experiment a little bit with the speakers and the cabinet that you have, or the pickups and the overdrive, throwing an EQ in the loop, you can really fine tune that thing to sound to punch way above its price point, to punch way above its weight. But that can really be said for any amp, and that's kind of one of the takeaways here, guys, is for pretty much any amp I own, whether it be a $4,000 Mezza Barba or whether it be one of my Jet Cities for, you know, that I picked up used for 150 bucks. Each one of those amps, I'm gonna work through a bunch of stuff in order to find the best combination. But if you're somebody like me who's an EVH or a 5150 collector just because I love the tones, I've got the 212 combos sitting right behind me, I've got a ton of those amps, I think it fits right in that family, and it does stuff just a little bit different. It takes out that Cocteau mid-range that we're kind of used to hearing. It's got two very usable channels, it's got some cool features built in, and it's at a great price point in the new market. So again, is it my favorite amp? No. Do I still think it's a great amp? Yes, I think it's a great amp, and I think doing what I do to every other amp out there, which is EQ it, throw the right boost in front of it, match the right pickup and the right cab to it, it can sound absolutely awesome. And now that I know that it holds up easily to a band situation, even in a situation that's not ideal where I'm playing through a cab that I already know that I don't like the way that it sounds, I still made it sound good to my ear. My guitarist even made a comment and he's like, why do everybody hate those? Like, why are these getting so much flack? And I just said, I don't really know, man. That's exactly my point. So that was a very long-winded way to basically say, yeah, the amp holds up to band practice, and even with a little tweaking, it can excel. So if you were on the fence thinking that maybe the amp wasn't going to work in a band setting, it was gonna fall apart at higher volumes due to that lower power rating, or you just didn't think that it was gonna sit in the mix or cut through the mix, those are some things that you can take into consideration if that's what you want the amp to do. There are things that you can do, just like every other amp, to tweak it to your liking. And once I did those simple things, I found myself really enjoying what I was getting out of the amp. So with that being said, that is gonna do it for me today. I hope that you guys found this episode helpful. If you did, hit that like button on the way out, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of my stuff. If you'd like to support the channel and what I do here, down in the description of this video is my Sweetwater affiliate link, my Patreon membership page, and then also the Belligerent Amateur Nation, where you can join my Discord server and my Facebook group and come hang out with me and everybody in this little community that loves to talk gear. We'd love to have you. Kyle here again. We'll see you guys next time.
Take two with EQ. Action, action, action.
Good help, good help.
What